The Walking Dead has just concluded its 10th season, an impressive feat for our modern day culture that values new and exciting content constantly, and more so for a series that has often been associated with the terms such as repetitive. The Walking Dead is a show that has had both the highest highs and the lowest lows, its mountains and valleys when you look at its 10-season run, with characters throughout that you hate to love to hate, and come to love after an initial hate. But when on an endless journey, where the horizon is not visible from where you sit, why should we continue to love when we no longer remember the reasons we came to feel this way in the first place? In this video I'm going to be addressing the idea of love, for both characters and their development, and how it is eventually lost when a series like The Walking Dead becomes so long. When we as viewers stare at the screen and in time forget why we ever cared because the reasons are so far gone. I want to briefly state as we begin that I love The Walking Dead, and I love the 10th season. I think it may have finally corrected its course, and we may look forward to some of the best seasons yet. This video is made by a fan, someone who wants The Walking Dead to succeed. So, as you listen to my arguments, please keep that in mind, because I truly want what's best for the show, and an important part of improvement is listening to criticism. I want you to consider for a second the idea of the final goal, the overarching theme that connects a TV show throughout its run. For most, as you could probably imagine, it's an easy thing to pinpoint. As in pinpoint, what is the point? Take Game of Thrones for example. Say what you want about its ending, but it always had a clear end goal, a target to be achieved. Who will take the Iron Throne? Who will be the one to sit on it at the end of the series? It's a simple question, but it keeps the series on course throughout. It gives a tangible endgame to the series that we continually look forward to and build toward, as key political players are killed off and different wars occur. It doesn't have to just be one question or one goal, but whatever it is, it needs to be clear and it needs to be unifying for a retained interest. With this said, a series can be great without a clear-cut goal or overarching achievement. I would argue The Sopranos, for example, doesn't have a particularly clear-cut goal for its end, but it's negated by the fact that the series didn't overstay its welcome. It was happy being its own thing, a well-told myth instead of an averagely told odyssey. The ending specifically telling us that it was simply a singular piece of Tony's life we've peered into, which is nice, because we as the viewer can then decide what became of the characters, yet reminisce about the events of the series with enjoyment. The Walking Dead misses this because there doesn't seem to currently be an endpoint in sight. Everything collapses and repairs within a season or even half season. Events like death become inconsequential when it's toyed with throughout fake-outs. The end goal has never really been clear. What is it? Survive? Rebuild civilization? The problem lies that The Walking Dead is kind of just happening. There isn't really a point aside from the survival of our characters. There never feels to be an overall goal aside that. Character codependence is the idea that in order for characters to properly function, they need one another to do so. The characters in The Walking Dead exist in this codependent way, and when you continually remove core characters, routinely for 10 years, it reaches a point where too many blocks have been removed and the tower begins to wobble. This was especially evident at the start of Season 7, which was arguably the beginning of the end for The Walking Dead. We care about the characters because of the effect and relationship they have to other characters. We care about Daryl because he cares about Carol. We care about Carol because she cares about Rick. We care about Rick because he cares about Carl. Except obviously they care about more than just one person. This is part of the reason why I personally have lost a lot of care for Maggie. I'll admit her departure does hurt her case, but I feel genuinely less compelled by her than I did in Season 3 when we had a lot of her family remaining. Her child Herschel has been presented so far as unimportant. She disagreed with Rick on the matter of killing Negan, and now there doesn't seem to be many relationships that remain. Especially with the additional deaths where basically every major Hilltop character has been killed, as well as the Hilltop itself. So think back. Why'd you like Maggie? Oh, hey, well remember that time with Glenn when... Oh, he isn't here anymore. That was a really great moment with Beth. Do you remember? Oh, right, yeah. Well, what about Herschel and... Oh no, right. Decapitated. Maggie is a prime example of a character built on other characters. A character that is wholly reliant on relationships with other characters for her to fully feel alive. Maybe this is just me, but when I look at Maggie now, I'm not really sure what I see in her anymore. Who she is, why I like her. There are some amazing characters that have risen from almost nothing. Barely any backstory, or character even. The Walking Dead has this tendency to introduce characters by them telling you what they did before, which usually gives us some indication on who they are. Glenn was always the most relatable, meaning his departure was all the more catastrophic. Think of it this way, it would be like removing Jim from The Office. Toppling the everyman, the relatable nice guy, means you either have to find another or you need to be aware that to an extent people now care less about a large amount of other characters, due to how the everyman interacted with them. The issue with how The Walking Dead has built its characters is that most of the reasons why we love them is because of their actions within the show. But that's just the issue. We love them because of what they've done and who they are. Something that is very flimsy when it comes to the long term, and more so when they are so codependent on other characters, who are in a constant slip through a revolving door. Ah, time jumps. How can something so simple feel so controversial? Part of me loves them. We get to see what happens with people, how they've physically grown and changed, how the environment has become built up and stronger than before. But The Walking Dead, a series that already spans multiple years, having multiple and consecutive time jumps. Someone pointed out to me on Reddit the other day, and it kinda broke my heart. It was that Daryl has realistically known Negan longer than he had Rick. This can be applied for anyone still alive. He's known Judith longer than Rick, Father Gabriel, Rosita. He knew Henry longer than Carl. This kind of concept in a show like The Walking Dead, where character codependence is strong, makes the character relationships even more weakened in the temporal space of the show. Everything prior to Season 9's 7-year jump seems somewhat inconsequential, because the current characters have been alive and walking around for 7 years after Rick's departure. That kind of shift makes you reflect and say, well, how important really was Rick's story if all of these characters have lived on for so much longer after his death? It's this idea that in the temporal space of the show, Rick was there for maybe a quarter of its run, despite actually being there for 9/10. So, although we saw the events of Rick's journey, they feel belittled by the fact that secondary characters such as Alden have now in the universe of the show had a longer story than his, been around these people longer than him. This whole concept ruins love for characters as a whole. Why care about them when a season could pass and we could now be 10 years on with largely a different cast? It didn't help also that Rick was the protagonist of the show up to his departure. Point being, time jumps mess up audience perception and deem prior events arguably inconsequential, and seem more like bother than a true event necessary for the development of the show and the survival of its characters. To conclude, my love for The Walking Dead feels like it is always diminishing, and the reason for that is the idea of the endless journey. A journey that does not have a foreseeable conclusion. This disallows the audience to long for the end, something that they should do. However good the series, the outcome is important. The endless journey is caused by a lot of things, but the ones I outlined were the lack of a goal or end goal, character codependence paired with a high mortality rate series, and finally time jumps, which make character relationships within the world feel inconsequential, because from our perspective we miss out on years at a time, and events that once seemed significant feel inferior to smaller ones in the current. I'm going to be making a part 2 to this, as I have experienced this with another series, Vikings. I'm going to be exploring that also, and how it differs in some ways. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Discussion and comments are truly welcome. Feel free to like if you've enjoyed, and subscribe if this content is something you want to see more of. Thank you, and goodbye.